I knew something was wrong the moment I turned onto the gravel road leading to my farmhouse. There was a strange glint in the sunlight, something metallic, cutting across the eastern field where rows of sweet corn used to sway in the breeze. As I got closer, my heart sank. A train track in actual tourist-style miniature railway ran straight through the heart of my land, not just rails but decorative lights, wooden benches, and cheerful signs about the historic charm of Pinerist's agricultural roots. My boots crunched over torn-up soil as I walked into what used to be my best field, now scarred and trampled, the crop destroyed. I hadn't been gone that long, just 3 weeks out of state to care for my daughter after her surgery, but in that short time someone had taken the liberty of turning my family's 3-generation farm into their personal amusement ride. I stood frozen, fists clenched, a sick weight pressing into my gut. Who would do this? And then it hit me. Pinerist HOA, the same homeowners association that had spent years trying to push me off my own land, claiming my unsightly red barn and morning tractor noise were bringing down their property values. They had finally gone too far. The train line ran directly from their pristine clubhouse on one end of the neighborhood to the newly built Heritage Center on the other, using my property as the shortcut. I stormed into the HOA office where Rebecca Winters, the ever-smug president, greeted me with a tight smile and a dismissive wave, claiming legal easement rights. She even slid a check across the desk, peanuts, a few $100, as if that could cover the loss of my best soil and an entire season of crops. But as rage and disbelief boiled inside me, I remembered something, a story my grandfather once told me long ago, something about a boundary dispute on the northeast corner of our land back in the 60s. A parcel he always suspected had been misfiled, but he'd never pushed it. That night I started digging literally and figuratively through old filing cabinets in the barn. What I uncovered would change everything. The HOA thought they had stolen from me. They had no idea they were standing on my land, and I was about to take it back. My name is Daniel Miller, and this land has been in my family since 1943. My grandfather bought it after returning from World War II and built everything on it with his own hands: the red barn, the fence line, the irrigation system. He raised livestock, planted corn, and taught me the value of hard work, quiet mornings, and honest living. When he passed away 5 years ago, he left the entire 50 acres to me back then. This area was still mostly rural, just open fields and long dirt roads, but times changed. Suburban sprawl crept in, bit by bit, until my farm became a lone island in a sea of manicured lawns, oversized homes, and freshly poured sidewalks. That's how Pinerist was born, a master-planned community of picture-perfect cul-de-sacs and HOA regulations, stacked thicker than cornstalks. And ever since they built that place around me, the HOA has treated my farm like some kind of eyes. Or they said my barn was too bright, that my vegetable garden was unruly, and that the sound of my tractor at sunrise was disturbing their peace. They called it progress. I called it nonsense. I made it clear from the start I was not interested in joining their little club. My land was private, not part of their development, but that didn't stop them from trying. They sent letters, they left brochures. One board member even suggested my land would be better served as a retirement complex. I laughed in his face. This place is my life, not a real estate opportunity. But things got worse when Rebecca Winters took over as HOA president. She came from a corporate background, all sharp suits and sharper smiles. During her campaign, she promised to solve the farm problem, treating my home like a smudge on their perfect map. And then came Richard Thompson, a right-hand man, a retired lawyer with a silver tongue and a briefcase full of threats disguised as suggestions. He stopped by, often hinting that developers would pay handsomely for my land. Said a man my age shouldn't be working so hard. Left flyers for luxury condos and brochures about beachfront timeshares, like he was doing me a favor. But I saw what they were doing. They wanted me gone. They wanted this land not because they valued it, but because they wanted to erase it, to bury everything my grandfather built under concrete and Glass I ignored them. I plowed my fields. I harvested my crops, and every time I saw Rebecca's Range Rover cruise by my fence line, I made sure she saw me, working proud and unbothered. But what I didn't see coming, what I couldn't imagine, is that one day they would stop trying to push me off my land and simply take it, not all of it, just enough to humiliate me, just enough to break the rules and pretend they had the right. They thought I wouldn't fight back. They thought they were smarter, richer, more powerful. But what they didn't understand is that this farm isn't just land, it's legacy, and I'd rather burn it down than let them steal it from me. It started with a few surveyor stakes near the eastern edge of my field. I noticed them a day before I left town, red tip markers poking out of the dirt like weeds. I figured the HOA was probably rerouting their irrigation or doing one of their endless landscaping upgrades. I didn't think much of it. My daughter had just come out of surgery and needed help with the grandkids, so I packed up and headed out of state for a few weeks, trusting that when I came back my crops would be waiting like they always were. But the second I pulled into the driveway and saw steel rails slicing through my cornfield, I knew I had made a mistake. Not just tracks, but signs, benches, decorative lighting, and a bright red and white tourist train parked right in the middle of my damn soil. There were welcome banners talking about the rich agricultural heritage of Pinehurst, plastered with vintage-style photos and cheerful slogans. It would have been funny if it hadn't been so infuriating. They hadn't just built a train through my land, they had built an entire theme ride glorifying a farming legacy while destroying the actual farm. That legacy came from my best topsoil, was ruined, an entire acre of sweet corn gone, and they had the nerve to put up signs about respecting the past. I stormed straight to the HOA office, heart pounding like a war drum. Rebecca Winters greeted me with that fake smile of hers, leaning casually against the counter like she was waiting for a manicure. When I demanded to know who authorized the construction, she pulled out a folder and handed me a copy of some permit stamped with a county seal. She said they had easement rights under an obscure ordinance and that a certified letter had been sent to notify me. I never received anything, I told her, my voice rising. She gave a little shrug, saying the letter was delivered while I was away and that the train was for the benefit of the community. It would increase property values, she said, as if that was supposed to make me thankful. Then Richard Thompson stepped out of the back office, smug as ever, and laid a check on the counter. Compensation, he called it a few $100, not even enough to cover the seed I had lost. I pushed the check back toward him, jaw tight, blood boiling. You destroyed my crop, invaded my land, and you think I can be bought off with pocket change? His smoke didn't move. We acted within our rights, Mr. Miller. You can take it up with the county if you like, but you'll find our paperwork is solid. I left without another word, my hands shaking with rage. That night I walked the length of the tracks from where they entered my property near the clubhouse to where they exited near the Heritage Center. Every step felt like a slap in the face. Decorative lanterns lined the path like it was some damn carnival. I stood in the middle of what used to be my cornrows, breathing in the sickly scent of fresh paint and scorched earth, and I realized something. They didn't just build a train. They declared war, and while they thought I was just some old farmer too stubborn to sell, too broke to fight back, they had no idea who they were dealing with. Because while they were busy forging permits and laying tracks, they forgot one crucial detail. I knew this land better than anyone, and I was about to remind them exactly what that meant. That night I didn't sleep. I couldn't. My thoughts kept circling like vultures. Rage, frustration, helplessness. I'd spent years fending off this HOA, and now they had the audacity to plow through my land like I was just some stubborn relic in their path to suburban perfection. I sat in the old barn with a single lamp buzzing overhead, surrounded by dust and silence, the scent of aged wood and motor all thick in the air. That's when I remembered something, just a fragment of a memory, something my grandfather once said when I was a kid helping him patch a fence along the northeast corner. There was a dispute. He'd mentioned something odd about the boundary lines, but he never made a big deal out of it because back then it was just woods and nothing worth fighting over. My heart thumped. What if there was more to it? I stood up, walked to the back of the barn, and opened the old metal filing cabinet. It always kept locked. I found the key years ago hidden in a hollow section of the barn post, but I'd never bothered digging through its contents until now. Drawer after drawer I sifted through. Manila folders labeled with years' crops, tax records, then I found it tucked deep in the back, a thin, faded folder labeled in my grandfather's blocky handwriting, Northeast Corner Dispute 1968. I pulled it out with trembling hands. Inside were old survey maps, correspondence with the county, and a detailed hand-drawn sketch from a private surveyor. As I laid the documents out across his workbench, I felt a slow, steady shift in the air, like the wind changing direction before a storm. The surveyor's sketch showed something unbelievable. That small wooded corner where the Pioneerist HOA had built their headquarters, the very office where Rebecca held her smug little meetings and planned my destruction. That parcel was never officially transferred from my grandfather's deed due to a surveying error in 1968. The county had misfiled the boundary, and every development that came afterward had built off that incorrect line. But according to the original deed and the corrected survey enclosed in the folder, that quarter-acre still legally belonged to the Miller family farm, my land. I stayed at the map, pulse pounding. I wasn't just a victim of their overreach anymore. I held a card they didn't even know existed. I called Sam, my lawyer, first thing the next morning. I scanned every document and emailed them over. He went quiet for a full minute after reading, then finally said, "This might actually work. Give me a few days to cross-check county records." 3 days later, he called me, and I could hear the excitement in his voice. "Daniel, your grandfather's documentation is rock solid. That land was never properly transferred. The HOA's office sits smack in the middle of your property legally. It's yours. They've been squatting on it for 7 years." I gripped the phone like it might float away. "Are you absolutely sure?" I asked. "As sure as I've ever been," Sam replied. "We can file for a corrected survey and formally re-establish your ownership. It'll take some paperwork, maybe some fees, but it's yours." I leaned back in my chair, staring out at the train in my field, its gory red paint catching the morning sun. All this time they thought they were untouchable, but they built their kingdom on my foundation, and now I had the power to tear it down, not out of revenge, but out of justice, because this land means something, and if I played this right, I could not only take back what was mine, I could turn this entire war on its head. Let them enjoy their stolen tracks and phony permits a little longer. Their reckoning was coming, and it would start with a knock on the very though they didn't even know they had no right to own. I knew I couldn't just march into the HOA office with my deed and start making demands. Not yet. That would only tip them off and give them time to cover their tracks or bury me in legal red tape. No, I had to move carefully, methodically. This wasn't just about reclaiming my land. It was about exposing what they were and making sure they could never do this to anyone else again. Sam helped me quietly file for a corrected survey and initiate the formal process to re-establish my ownership of the parcel where their headquarters sat. We paid extra for expedited filing, called in favors with the county clerk's office, and swore everyone involved to absolute silence. In the meantime, I started building my next move. I drove downtown to the offices of Veterans Rebuilding America, a non-profit I'd been donating produce to for years. My grandfather was a veteran, and he believed deeply in taking care of those who served. I sat down with their director, Maria Jenkins, and told her the whole story, how the HOA had bulldozed my crops, built a train on my land, and unknowingly erected their headquarters on property they didn't own. I told her I planned to reclaim that building, and then I told her I wanted to donate it. Her eyes widened. "You giving it to us?" she asked, stunned. "If you can use it," I said. She leaned forward, nodding slowly. "We've been looking for a new space. Rent downtown is killing us. Are you sure about this?" I didn't even hesitate. I want that building to do something good. I wanted to stand for something real. With Maria on board, I called Jeff, an old friend who'd helped with my farm security years ago. He was still a locksmith, and I told him I'd need him on short notice. Then I asked a sympathetic neighbor to quietly get me a copy of the HOA bylaws, the same ones Rebecca was so quick to weaponize. I read every word of that bloated document until I found what I needed. Section 12, paragraph 7. Official HOA business must be conducted from the registered headquarters. Temporary relocations for emergencies could last no more than 14 days. Perfect. Every night that week, I stood on my porch watching the train run through my field, using my anger as fuel. I ordered a large custom banner to be printed and contacted a friend at the local paper asking if they could have a photographer. Just happened to be driving by at a certain time when Sam called and said the paperwork had been finalized. I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. It's official, he said. The building belongs to you. All the legal documentation is signed, sealed, and on its way. That was all I needed. I called Maria and Jeff and set the plan in motion for Saturday morning. The same day the HOA did their monthly inspections. At dawn, before the neighborhood was awake, I arrived at the office with Sam's paperwork in hand and a sheriff's deputy who had agreed to witness the action. Jeff was already there, changing every lock on the doors. You're sure about the legality? The deputy asked as he reviewed the documents. I nodded. This land belongs to me, and this building sits on it. I'm simply exercising my rights as its owner. Once the locks were changed, we posted copies of the ownership transfer and a notice of donation to Veterans Rebuilding America on every entrance. By 8 a.m., Maria and a dozen volunteers had arrived wearing matching shirts, unloading equipment, and hanging the massive banner across the front of the building. Future home of Veterans Rebuilding America. They brought flags, coffee, donuts, clipboards. They looked like a well-oiled machine ready to bring purpose to a place that had been used to enforce control. The energy was electric. People started to notice. Curious neighbors came out with coffee mugs and confused expressions. Then right on cue, Rebecca Winters pulled into the lot. In her shiny black SUV, she stopped when she saw the crowd, the signs, the banner, the flags, and then she saw me standing right in the middle of it all. She stepped out, heels clacking across the pavement, her eyes wild with disbelief. What the hell do you think you're doing? She snapped. I handed her a copy of the deed signed and sealed by the county. Taking back what's mine, I said, and giving it to someone who will actually use it for good. She stared at the paper, her face draining of color. She looked up at the banner again, then back at me. The queen of the HOA had no idea she'd been ruling from a throne that wasn't even hers, and now her empire was starting to crumble. Rebecca's face went from shock to fury in an instant. She stormed up to me, eyes blazing, voice shrill. This is HOA property, she snapped, jabbing a finger toward the building behind me. You are trespassing and interfering with official business. I calmly handed her the certified documents again, letting the silence stretch as she scanned the county seal, the corrected survey, the notarized signatures. The sheriff's deputy stepped beside me, arms crossed. I've reviewed the paperwork. This parcel legally belongs to Mr. Miller. He has full rights to the property and the structure on it. Her mouth opened, then closed. She looked over her shoulder at the banner flapping in the wind, the volunteers in matching t-shirts, the news photographer snapping pictures from the curb. It was all happening faster than she could process, and for the first time since I'd met her, she looked genuinely lost. Moments later, Richard Thompson came rushing across the parking lot, huffing and red-faced, holding a leather briefcase like it was a weapon. He yanked the documents from Rebecca's hands and started flipping through them. This cannot be legal, he barked. We'll sue you for everything you have. I raised an eyebrow. You mean like how you built a train track through my land using forge permits? I wonder what the county commissioner will think when he sees that. The crowd murmured. More neighbors had gathered, drawn by the spectacle, and now they were hearing details they'd never known about the falsified permits, the aggressive tactics, the reckless. Spending one woman's step forward arms. Crossed. Is that true, Rebecca? You built the train without proper approval. Another man chimed in. Our dues doubled this year because of that thing. We were told it was all handled. Rebecca tried to speak, but the questions kept coming fast and sharp. Did the board even vote on it? Who signed off on the construction? Why didn't we verify the land ownership before building our headquarters? I stood silently as the tide turned. Maria was introducing the veterans to the residents, explaining their program's job, training, housing assistance, therapy groups. The mood shifted. What had started as confrontation was becoming community. People were nodding, listening. Someone offered to bring coffee. Another said their son was a Marine and asked how to volunteer. Meanwhile, Rebecca and Thompson retreated to the side, whispering frantically, faces pale. The reporter moved and recorder out, asking pointed questions neither of them wanted to answer. Rebecca eventually muttered no comment and pushed past the crowd, retreating to her SUV with Thompson trailing behind. The HOA was unraveling in real time, and everyone could see it. That afternoon, I heard through Ellen, one of the few board members with a conscience, that an emergency meeting had been called at someone's house. Total chaos. She texted half the board wants to resign. Financial records are being pulled. The reserve fund is nearly empty. Apparently, Rebecca had authorized the train project unilaterally, using funds meant for infrastructure repairs and legal contingencies. The fallout spread fast. That night, the local news ran the story with a headline that read, "Farmer reclaims land from HOA donates building to veterans." The footage showed Maria and the veterans raising flags, neighbors shaking hands, and Rebecca speeding away from her own office. The online comments were brutal. One read, about time someone took down one of these HOA tyrants. Another said, God bless that farmer and the veterans. By Sunday morning, a petition was circulating to remove Rebecca from her position and demand a full audit of the HOA's finances. By Monday, she was gone. Thompson vanished from a neighborhood too quietly, stepping down and allegedly facing questions from the state bar about his role in the forged permits. The train sat idle on my land, its red paint already starting to dull under the spring sun. No more test runs, no more smug smiles, just silence. The empire they built on arrogance and fake authority had collapsed, and all I did was remind them who really owned the ground they were standing on. 3 days after the whole thing came crashing down, I got a call from Ellen. Her voice was hesitant at first, polite but clearly carrying the weight of responsibility. Mr. Miller, she said, I've been appointed interim president of the HOA. The board voted Rebecca out unanimously. I let that hang in the air moment, letting the truth of it settle. Then she added, we've reviewed everything and we owe you an apology. What the previous administration did was wrong, no excuses. I told her I appreciated the honesty. She said the board wanted to meet to find a path forward that worked for everyone. I agreed cautiously. We sat down 2 days later in her living room, the new board members all looking more tired than powerful. Ellen laid out a proposal. The HOA would fully dismantle the train line and restore my field to its original condition, covering every penny of cost. They'd also compensate me fairly for the destroyed crops at market value, not the insulting check Thompson once tried to slide across a desk. But there was one request: would the Veterans Organization consider leasing back a small section of the building for HOA use, just one conference room for monthly board meetings and a corner office for records? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I brought out my own terms. First, a formal binding acknowledgement that my farm would never be subject to HOA oversight now or ever. Second, the boundary between my land and Pinehurst would be designated a protected agricultural heritage zone. No development, no intrusion, no exceptions. And third, for every dollar of rent paid by the HOA to veterans rebuilding America, they would match it with a donation to the organization. The room was quiet for a long moment. Then Ellen nodded slowly. Those terms are Acceptable we want to rebuild trust be. Better neighbors be better people we. Shook on it, and within a week Sam had the contracts drawn up and signed. Crews arrived the following Monday. They tore up the train tracks piece by piece, repaired the soil, replanted native grass. For the first time in months I stood in my eastern field and saw nothing but open land again. The red and white train cards were disassembled and donated to the local children's museum, where they were converted into an interactive exhibit about agriculture and transportation. Ironically, now they were actually being used to teach kids about farming, something the HOA once tried to erase. The veterans moved into the building by the end of the month. Maria reported that several Pinehurst residents had already signed up as volunteers, and some had even offered to help with renovations and fundraising. A strange thing started happening after that. People waved at me, neighbors I'd never spoken to stopped by with questions about crops or asked if they could buy produce directly. One afternoon, Ellen knocked on my door with an idea. What if we built a community garden right at the edge of the property where Pinehurst met the farm? Maria loved the idea. Gardening is therapeutic for many of our veterans, she explained, and this would give them purpose, connection, and maybe even skills they could use later. So in April we broke ground. 20 residents showed up with shovels and seedlings. Kids came too, curious and wide-eyed. Someone brought lemonade, someone else brought homemade pie. What started as a boundary line was slowly becoming a bridge. The garden flourished through the summer, flowers and vegetables tended by rough veteran hands and soft suburban palms alike. My grandfather's farm was thriving again, not just in crops but in spirit. That fall I set aside a section of the harvest for the veterans' food pantry, just like Grandpa used to do. And one day, as I was loading a truck full of donated produce, I caught sight of a familiar SUV slowing near the edge of the property. Rebecca, she didn't stop, just stayed at the sign for Veterans Rebuilding America, as if trying to rewrite history with her eyes. Then she drove off. Last I heard, she moved into a downtown condo. No HOA. Thompson resigned from the board completely and faded into obscurity, probably hoping the state bar would forget about him. The new HOA board rewrote their bylaws, added transparency requirements, public voting on major projects, and cut dues back to reasonable levels. Last week, Ellen asked me if I'd consider serving as an honorary member of their new community relations committee. We need your voice, she said, to make sure we don't forget what really matters. I said yes on one condition: all meetings must include cookies made from my grandmother's recipes. Some traditions, after all, are worth keeping. Spring came early that year, and with it something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. I walked the fence line one morning, the sun rising over rows of fresh crops in the eastern field, the soil rich and dark where the train tracks used to be. The wind carried the scent of new growth, and laughter from the community garden. Nearby veterans in worn boots worked side by side with Pinehurst residents in sneakers and sun hats, tending rows of carrots and maragles, swapping stories and sharing coffee. Kids chased each other between the flower beds while Maria explained composting techniques to a group of curious teenagers. It was surreal, almost too good to be true, but it was real. The same land they once tried to take from me had become the heartbeat of something better. One afternoon, a boy from the neighborhood handed me a drawing he made of the Red Barn, calling it the coolest place in town. His mom said they'd started buying vegetables from the farm stand every weekend and were thinking of raising chickens. People were learning again about the land, about each other, and maybe, just maybe, about what community really meant. Not fences and fines, not board meetings and bylaws, but connection, respect, and shared roots. I still wore my grandfather's overalls most mornings, the ones patched and faded from years of work. When I looked out over the fields, I could almost hear his voice, steady and proud. We didn't just save the farm, we saved its soul, and in doing so reminded a whole town that progress doesn't mean paving over the past, it means building on it together. The fence between Pinehurst and my land still stood, but now the gate swung open both ways. Sometimes when you fight back, You don't just win, you grow something stronger in its place.